Okay, good morning. This meeting is being conducted pursuant to New York State Open Meetings Law, Public Officers Law, Sections 100, etc. For purposes of this meeting, I shall designate Julia Lee as recording secretary. Today we have before us consideration of the following proposed amendments to Board Rules 1-13E and Chapter 3. So let's begin with Board Rules 1-13E. These are dealing with the question of permitting an agency to assign a public servant to use city time and resources in support of a not-for-profit entity that serves a city purpose, if approved by the board, and if approved by the board to be involved in that nonprofit city business. The rules have two parts. One is the work-only part, and the other is the work-only be involved in city business dealings. We saw these previously in July. Sent out to the law department. The law department sent it back with some very modest changes, mostly I think going to the statement of business and statement of purpose rather than the content. Any comments from the board or staff on the draft, the proposed amendments to Board Rules 1-13E?
The only thought I had, not on the draft, especially the draft I think is fine, the standard for permitting an employee to do business with the city in a position with a not-for-profit. I think we've got to consider what it is our standards are going to be when we permit that. Because I would think it would be few and far between where it would be in the interests of the city and not a conflict of interest for a city employee working for another entity to then participate, for example, in negotiations with the city over a contract or other terms. So that, at least speaking for myself, I think one would have a pretty high bar to establish that this is something that should be permitted. If you have an example for, say you're working, I can understand this in the context of a Parks Conservancy, where someone would be working in a conservancy and also in the Parks Department, furthering the same purpose. But say you're in a social service agency or a homeless agency, the commissioner says, well, it would be helpful if you could have a position over with the service provider. It would smooth things out. The commissioner says this is in the interest of the city. But if you want to go beyond that to say, well, you can then negotiate with the city over the terms of the services provider's contract or relationship with the city, I think it'd be pretty hard to justify that. And we would have it would come to us, and I'm just speaking more generally to say that for me at least, it would be a pretty high bar to demonstrate why it would be in the interest of the city for that to go forward. But other than that, I have no objection to the language.
Right. So the standard in the rule that's in effect now and is not, as you said, is not really the
Right.
subject of this rule amendment is that for actually participating in the business dealings with a not-for-profit are in E2, and it requires, of course, agency head approval. And that there be a demonstrated nexus between the proposed work and the public servant's city job and the mission of the public servant's agency. And then I think most importantly, and I think this provides the board flexibility to make exactly the kind of determination that you're talking about, it says, and that such participation furthers the agency's mission and is not undertaken for primarily for the benefit or interest of the not-for-profit entity. So I think the board that provides the board with some latitude to evaluate these on a case-by-case basis and take into consideration exactly the kinds of things that you were considering.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
have no problem with the language, just that in application, at least speaking for myself, would be a pretty high bar.
Which part of E2 is it in addition to? Like I see the question maybe, and then we see there's two different standards, I guess, but then which part specifically is the additional part?
So the rule is
For the business dealing.
right. That's exactly what I was just sort of
ones that you
summarizing
were-
in
right.
E2.
Right.
E1 has a lesser standard and doesn't require any action by the
By the
board, it's a
board, that's the
determination by the
piece,
agency.
right, because it still has the nexus, it still has furthers the mission, and they would have had to been designated by the agency head.
That's right.
But then the extra piece is then the board finds this.
Right, that the board essentially,
Right.
right, finding that such participation furthers the
Right.
agency's mission and is not undertaken primarily for the benefit
Gotcha.
or interest of the not-for-profit entity, which, I think is intended to provide the board some latitude
Right.
to decide these on a,
Right.
looking at the
Case by
facts of
case,
each case.
Ethan, can you say a little bit more what is meant by business dealings? I mean, Jeff raised some rather dramatic things like contract negotiations. I assume it's also comes in more low-level things.
Well-
What are business dealings? Maybe it's a better way to ask the question.
Sure, business, so, that, is a defined term in chapter
Mhm.
68, and it means the kinds of things that Jeff is,
Mhm.
was talking about, contracts, permits, licenses, litigation regarding those things. That's what the term business dealing means in chapter 68.
Can we go off the record for 1 second? Are there any further comments from the board or staff on the draft proposed amendments to Board Rules 1-13E? Well, hearing no more, I call for a motion that the board adopt the recommended amendment to Board Rules 1-13E as a final rule.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? There are no opposed. The motion for adoption of the proposed amendments as presented as the final rule has passed. All right, now we move on to our second proposal. We have before us consideration of the proposed amendments to Board Rules, Chapter 3. And I guess to say this in the broadest brush, this is really our revision of our rules in light of the City Council's revision of the local law dealing with city official affiliated not-for-profits. So they made a lot of changes, and we're now changing our rules to in effect, to fall in line with what they did, some of which involves deleting some things, because they put a lot more, in certain areas, they put a lot more stuff in the administrative code, and in other areas, they took things out.
Yes.
They deregulated certain activities, so our rules are deleting, mostly deleting, I think, in light of the fact, occasionally, some substantive changes, but mostly deleting in light of the city council's changes.
That's exactly right, yes. And streamlining to conform the rules to the administrative code and ensuring that we're in line with that. To that end, the law department has informally reviewed this, confirmed.
Okay, are there any further comments from the board or staff on the draft or proposed amendments to Board Rules, Chapter 3? Hearing none, I call for a motion that the board adopt the recommended amendment to Board Rules, Chapter 3 as the final rule. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor? Any opposed? None? Hearing none, the motion for adoption of the proposed amendments as presented as the final rule has passed. There being no further business for consideration pursuant to the open meetings law, this meeting is hereby adjourned.